I've got all my pieces sanded down to 220 grit after using denatured alcohol to raise the grain, and I'm still not ready for the staining process. I've raised the grain one more time after sanding everything down to the 220, so my next step is going from the 220 grit to 320 grit, raising that grain one final time, and then I'll be going over it with a gray Scotch-Brite pad, which is about the equivalent of 600 sanding grit for the final sanding, and that gets the wood down to a polishing level, just beginning to polish the surface of the wood. That's where I want it before I start doing the staining. I wanted to add an extra word about sanding down to 320 and then down to 600 grit. Some of the books that I've read and sources online say that 220 is normally as far as any woodworker would want to go or need to go for their purposes, but because this is some fine furniture that we're working on, and because it's a Greene and Greene style, the finish that we're trying to achieve requires a greater degree of sanding everything down to a polished surface. So that's why we're going all the way to 600. Here on the left I have one of the back pieces that I've already sanded down. You can see the difference quite easily between that and the one that hasn't been sanded yet. I haven't actually wiped it afterwards, but there we go. So this has been sanded all the way to 600. This is at 220. It's a visible difference. So it's already had that grain raised on it. I'll sand it down to 320. I have it on top of a piece of sanding pad that you can just buy anywhere. It's like kind of like a pad to go underneath an area rug. Especially in these areas where I have a curve, I want to make sure that I get that nice and smooth and ensure that it's polished quite well. Still is a little bit darker than the one that I have the final finish on. I'll take alcohol to that to raise the grain one more time. And I'll finish that off with a gray pad. Put this on block. You can see there's a bit of dust coming off, which is good. And that gets it pretty smooth. Then I'll raise that grain one more time with the alcohol and take it down to 600. Definitely a difference between this side and the side that's at 220. It's fresh cloth. That beautiful grain just pops. especially in these areas where I have some end grain, slight end grain, different grain than on the flat surfaces. Really need to make sure those are well polished. I have all of my legs laid out here in front of me. The process is going to be the same thing for all of the pieces, but just to show you what I'm working on and what happens when you wipe these down, it's really something. The alcohol is going to bring out the natural color in the wood. So that's going to get rid of all of my dust, my sanding dust, and clean it up, get it ready for the finishing. This will also show any imperfections in my woodwork, areas that might need a little bit more attention. And I think you can see a little bit of a difference between the surface of the one that I've just cleaned and the ones next to it, where there still is a lot of surface dust in them. You can see on my cloth that it is picking up quite a bit of the dirt. So I want them really clean before I start putting any kind of finishing product on them. So if I were to put the varnish on at this point, this is pretty much the kind of finish that I would see on my work. All the pieces are sanded, cleaned, and ready for staining.